Pearls versus Turds is the segment of the show where we take a bit of received wisdom from the internet. Maybe someone emailed in the show and said, hey, what do you think about this tip? And then we assess whether it's a pearl of wisdom or a turd for the turd pile. The scoreboard so far is 9 pearls, 36 turds, and 20 ties. We arrive at tie when either Ben and I can't agree or we're too chicken to put it in the turd pile where it really belongs. There are very few pearls out there. The email says, hi, Nathan and Ben. I really appreciate your podcast and the demon. I have a possible pearl versus turd. When I do a timed section of reading comprehension, I always run out of time and don't get to one passage. When I finish the second passage, I look to see which one of the 2 passages left has the most questions and go to that passage. I tend to have enough time to thoroughly finish the passage I choose along with its questions. And then if I have time, I will go back to the passage I skipped. I don't feel like the later passages are harder than the beginning passages like you would find in LR. I'm hoping that I will eventually get fast enough that I'm reading all 4 passages, and then this advice may end up being unnecessary. What are your thoughts? Thanks again for all the help you provide, Amanda. What do you think, Ben?
Well, I don't care whether Amanda does the 3rd passage or the 4th passage. So if she's making a quick decision here based on the number of questions, which you can do extraordinarily fast with the digital test, because you can see exactly how many questions are in each passage.
You can tell that from just the navigation, right? You can just
from
look
the
at
navigation.
The map and see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say this is a pearl in the sense that I'm not going to like burden people with this thought process. Like, oh,
Right.
hey, when you get to the 3rd passage, just double check that the 4th passage doesn't have more questions. It's too much, but I don't have a problem with it because it's a quick decision and I don't care whether she does 3 or 4.
Yeah. If you know you're only doing 3 passages anyway, then you're deciding basically that you're going to skip a passage.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's a question that we get all the time in class is like, hey, if I'm going to run out of time, if I know I'm going to run out of time, which is very common.
Yep.
How do I decide which passages to do? I think it seems like Amanda is always doing the 1st and 2nd passage. And
Yep.
I think that's correct. For sure, the 1st passage. I think the 1st passage is the easier one.
I think in general, yeah. I mean, I get what she's saying. There's less like predictability than there is in logical reasoning. But I still feel like in general, passage 1 is going to be easier than later passages.
When it comes to passage 2, 3, and 4, I think that they tend to be basically equivalent difficulty. Amanda seems like she's just going ahead and doing passage 2 always, which is fine. I think we endorse that.
Yeah.
And then she's choosing between passage 3 and 4 based solely on the number of questions in the passage. And yeah, that's fine. That is when people ask, how do I choose? That's one of the things I say is, well, you could choose the one with more questions. The other way that she could choose though is based on topic, right? She could start reading the 3rd passage and decide if she hates the topic, then she could just hit the eject button and move on to the 4th. That would be another way of deciding which one of the 2, the final 2 passages to do first.
100%. I mean, you're going to know the topic within the first few words, if not the first sentence.
Right.
They start talking about spiders, it's in natural science passages. Right.
And that takes, 10 seconds to figure out. And if there are topics that are super intimidating to you, or if it's, if you're like, oh shit, spiders, that's awesome, I want to read about that, then you would probably want to stay there, even if that passage had fewer questions, because the more engaged you are, the better you're going to do on the questions, right? The easier the questions are going to be.
Yeah.
Okay. So decide between the 3rd and 4th passage based on the number of questions. Pearl, turd, or tie?
Okay, I'll give it a pearl, just because if someone asked in class, this is probably one thing that I would say. I would add the or topic.
It's an
So I'd rather
easy.
someone do a passage that they like, even if it's got fewer questions.
Okay, then that doesn't sound like a pearl anymore.
Yeah.
If you'd
Well,
rather they do
we're
it the other way.
changing their advice. If we change your advice, it's a pearl. Um,
I think we can give it a tie. I do
yeah.
think that there's there's a nugget of value in this for sure, and this is something that I have said in class many times. So it's a perfectly fine way to decide between the third and fourth passage, but topic would also be a perfectly fine way to decide between those passages. Amanda does note here that eventually she hopes to get to the point where she's going to read and answer all four passages, at which point this whole thing becomes entirely moot. Um, that's, I think, what really keeps it from being a pearl. You said earlier, Ben, that you're not going to burden people with this.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really important thing for LSAT teachers to learn, is
Yeah.
that every word you say, the class is like hanging on it. I was
Yeah.
always like amazed that people in class, they're like sitting there taking notes as I speak, and I'm like, really, you're writing that down, what I just said?
Yeah.
That's okay. Well, then let me back off a little bit and think about what
Prophet
things I want to
Nathan.
actually say, because I just, the last thing I want is for you to have this checklist of 100 things you're thinking about while you're doing the LSAT. Santi said it earlier, it kind of, it makes sense, and you just need to figure it out. And we teach a natural, intuitive approach to the test. That's one of the reasons why we give out so many pearls. We don't want people to think that there's like this litany of theory and strategies that you have to have on board. There's just not that much, right? It's
Yeah.
more like read it, understand it, figure it out.
Well, that's, and to get back to the whole definition of a pearl is something that is extraordinarily valuable. You're going to use that advice, but it's also something that we're like itching to tell you,
Right.
right? Like, you came to class tonight. I want to make sure you go home with this idea in your head. And that might be slow down, make sure you understand the passage, whatever. If class is ending, I'm not going to be like, wait, everybody, hold up. One other thing, when you get to the third passage, you're trying to
Yeah.
decide.
Always look to see how many questions there are in each passage. Or yeah, this is the kind of advice too that people, if they like extrapolated it, they would be like, well, what I do is at the beginning of the section, I look at all four of the passages and I figure out which one has the most questions, and I start there.
Yeah.
If you do that, I think you are very likely picking the hardest passage to start with.
Yeah.
So the hardest passage to understand, like the hardest passage to read.
Yeah.
And I would hate to see you do that. So definitely do the first passage, probably definitely do the second passage. If you know based on your practice tests that you're gonna run out of time and you only have one more passage left, then maybe choose the third or fourth passage based on the number of questions. But what is it, Ben? It's one or two more questions. The questions do take some time to answer. So I'm just not sure what the upside is really here.
Yeah.
So I know that really keeps it from being a pearl. Okay, so it's a
Too
tie.
much to think about. Yeah.